Hey everybody, today we are going to be looking at the cognitive verbs that you will need to know for your science externals. Now, what I've just done is I've got up the biology syllabus document. So if you just Google QCAA biology syllabus, this document will come up. And at the end of this document, they have a glossary of both the words that you actually need to know from the syllabus and then just what other words within the course mean. And included in this list are the cognitive verbs. Now, I'm using the biology one here, but they're actually the same for all the sciences. Like the definitions are exactly the same. But you do need to know these cognitive verbs because these are the words that tell you what the question is looking for and what the syllabus dot point is looking for. And I honestly used to think they weren't that important when like in year 10, like the history teacher would tell me about it. I'd be like, that does not matter. Turns out it actually does matter, and it is where you are going to get the bulk of your marks. Like if you know how to use these verbs properly, then you're going to know what the question is exactly asking you for. If I scroll all the way up and we see something like here, so this is just a part of the Unit 4 syllabus, and it's talking about, okay, explain the role of helicase or recall the structure of DNA. Like, what are actually the differences between those cognitive verbs? And within that, and I will be going through, well, I plan to be going through every syllabus dot point for each science, but these cognitive verbs also tell you the extent to which you actually need to know the content. And I will tell you examples of those when we get to those videos. But for now, I'm just going to take you through what the cognitive verbs are, which ones are important to you, and what they actually mean. So none of these mean anything. The first one that actually does mean something here would be to analyze. I do believe that there are some analyze syllabus points in there. And the definition here says dissect to ascertain and examine constituent parts and or their relationships, break down or examine in order to identify the essential elements, features, blah, 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 blah. Honestly, it's this part here that I think is probably the easiest to understand. Breaking down the information to identify the essential elements, features, components, or structure, and then deciding like the logicalness, and reasonableness of the information. It also, I think, is important down here. Try to consider something to explain and interpret it for the purpose of finding meaning or relationships and identifying patterns, similarities, and differences. So if the question asks you to analyze this, it's likely going to be data in some form when it comes to science. So you would look at identifying patterns, similarities, and differences, and having a look at the essential features, components, and all of that. So that is what you want to do for an analyze. And I probably should have said this before, just because these are the same across the sciences, they might not be the same, say, for like a humanities subject. I actually don't know. Just a warning. So that is what analyze means, but I feel like analyze is pretty straightforward because we have done that a lot, whereas some of these words, like it actually will mean something. Analyze, if you don't do exactly that, like it's not a big deal, but some of them it is a big deal. I guess there's apply. Apply means to use knowledge and understanding in response to a given situation or circumstance. Usually it'll just be something like apply this formula. I believe it'll be like for bio, for example, like apply Simpson's diversity index or something. This one isn't a hard one at all. It's basically just using a process or a procedure that was in the syllabus to answer a question or come up with a number or something like that. Appraise is in here, but I don't think I've ever seen it in any of the syllabus, so I'm just going to cross that out. Appreciate is the weirdest one ever. I know it's in the chemistry syllabus like maybe once or twice. It's so weird, but basically it just means to recognize or make a judgment about the value or worth of something. And you can tell that that's probably not the best description. Like, are we really judging the value or worth of something in our science questions? Don't really think so. It also means to understand fully or grasp the full implications of. If I'm going to be real with you, I wouldn't worry too much about any appreciate syllabus dot points. Probably not going to be assessed on them, and if you are, it might be in multiple choice format or like a 1-mark question. I don't imagine it being anything that out there, just because honestly, appreciate, what does that even mean? Like, I know there's a definition, but realistically it's sort of silly. There is argue, but I haven't actually seen that in there. Same with assess. I've never seen that. Calculate, they will ask you to calculate things. This is probably the most relevant in physics and chemistry. Calculate is super straightforward, but we do want to note that it is determining or finding a number, but you need to use mathematical processes. So calculate means you've got to use maths, and you should be showing the relevant stages in the working. So basically just show your working when it comes to a calculate thing. There is clarify. Again, I really can't imagine them asking a clarify question. I don't think that that is in the syllabus, so I doubt that they will use cognitive verbs that aren't in the syllabus. So I'm going to cross that one out. Classify, that might be in the biology syllabus, but classify just means to arrange, distribute, or order in classes or categories based on shared qualities or characteristics. Honestly, I could probably imagine like multiple choice classify questions in biology where they, I don't know, give you some sort of relationship between two species and you have to classify whether it is like predator or symbiosis, like those sorts of things. So that's probably what they could do with classify. Let's have a look. Oh, okay, compare. Compare is a big one that a lot of people make mistakes on. So compare means to recognize both the similarities and the differences, and recognize the significance of those similarities and differences. And compare is so common in the exams, so I would really make sure that you understand this one. But basically it means that you need to state both the similarities and differences, and preferably have two of each because it's plural. I know that's like a silly distinction, but it's plural, so try and make sure you have two similarities and two differences or more. And then what you need to do is you need to actually recognize, like, why is that significant? I know that is sort of hard to be like, oh, why is that significant? But if you go back and look in past papers, go back, find a compare question, and then go and look at the answer for that one, and they'll have some weird statement about the significance or something. You don't necessarily need to say, this is the significance, but, you know, they want you to make some sort of concluding or summary statement there or something instead of just listing them. You should have some concluding statement. Compare is a really big one that a lot of people make mistakes on, so I really want you guys to get good at stating both the similarities and the differences, and then the significance of those. Consider contrast. I think contrast is another one. Usually you hear it in like compare and contrast. They can ask you to use like two cognitive verbs in one question. I feel like we've heard compare and contrast a lot. Basically you first do the comparing, and then contrasting is when you display recognition of the differences and like really deliberately, it says juxtapose here, but just make it really obvious that they are those differences and show how they're different, give an account of the differences. So maybe in chemistry that might be like explaining the chemistry behind it, those sorts of things, and make sure that you are referring to both or all of them throughout. So in these questions you do need to address every single part of the question, otherwise like you're not doing a good job at it. So compare and contrast are big ones that people often mess up just because they don't know the actual definition of it. Honestly, I would not have taken that to be the definition of compare. Like, I always thought compare was talk about the differences. I would always forget about the similarities as well. So do not forget that. None of these are really... decide and deduce might be in there. Decide is to reach a resolution of consideration and make a choice from a number of alternatives. I haven't seen that. Deduce, reach a conclusion that is necessarily true, provided a given set of assumptions is true. So I do believe that that is like eliminating things like it must be true based on I don't know if you've heard of it, but deductive reasoning is like when something must be true because all other options are not true. So I think that that might be what it means here. But again, decide and deduce, I've never really seen them. They're not in any of the syllabus, I don't think. So I don't think they're too important there. We have define, and define, there are a fair amount of defines. I know there are in biology and physics, there are a lot. Chemistry, I don't know if there's any defines, but for the defines, they're really, really, really important. There is this definition here, but if you ever see a define in the syllabus, this glossary will give the exact definition that you have to know. So if we go back up here, I saw one up here, I'm pretty sure. Carrying capacity. Oh, maybe it's not that one. Hold on, let me find a define that I know is in the biology definition. Genome here. Okay, genome. I am 100% sure that one of the syllabus dot points for biology is define the genome. Now, that doesn't mean put it in your own words or anything. That means look at this definition in the glossary and memorize that exact definition. So whenever it says define, you'll go to the relevant syllabus, whether it's biochem or physics, and you would go down until you find that word, and then you'll put this part, this definition on a flashcard, and you will perfectly memorize it. Defines are really good for multiple choice questions, where they'll give a couple of answers that are super similar and they sound right, but they're not the QCAA definition, and you need to use the QCAA definition. Let's go back up. So we were at define, super duper important. Demonstrate, I haven't seen much demonstrate, but it is to make clear by an argument, reasoning, or evidence, and showing an example to go with it. So you would show your reasoning and your evidence, and then have a practical example to go along with it. Derive, again, I haven't seen too much of that. I actually think it might be in the physics syllabus when it says derive some certain law. I think it might be Faraday's, I cannot remember, but I'm pretty sure there might be a derive in the physics syllabus, and you need to derive one law from one of Newton's laws and something like that. I know that is a thing. I don't know if derive is the exact cognitive verb, but I think it might be. But to derive something is to arrive at it by reasoning, but basically it just means using a mathematical relationship to find the new relationship or equation. Now, we aren't doing maths here, so there's no derivatives or anything like that in any of the senior sciences. So what we want to look at is basically starting off with the maths relationship and then turning it into a different one. And that is relevant in physics only. There is describe, and describe is an important one. Slightly different to explain. It's sort of like a lower cognition than explain. To describe is to give an account of a situation, event, pattern, or process, and basically you give all the characteristics or features of something. So describe is basically just spit out as many facts as you know about this particular thing. Probably won't need any of these. Maybe, I think there might be a differentiate. To differentiate is to identify the differences between two or more things. And then there's words that mean the same thing. So distinguish, discriminate, same sorts of things. But really differentiate is just stating the differences. Don't get mixed up with compare, because compare is similarities and differences, whereas differentiate is just the differences. Discriminate means the same thing. Note, observe, or recognize a difference. Again, they've got differentiate down here, so they're synonyms, so they're really, really similar. And same with distinguish down there. Recognize something as distinct or different. Note the difference between them. And again, they've used discriminate, differentiate, etc. as synonyms. So all of these words here, the ones I'm highlighting in yellow, they're all the same thing. Basically just to state the differences. We do have discuss here, which might be in it. I'm not 100% sure, but it is to examine by argument, talk about the considerations for and against. So if you just talk about for or just talk about against, you're not going to get the marks, because you need to talk about both the for and against. So make sure that you are taking into consideration all of the different issues and ideas, and then give supporting opinions or evidence with conclusions with evidence. I don't think I've ever seen a discuss though. There is draw conclusions, which is just to make a judgment based on reasoning and evidence. Evaluate, I don't know if there's an evaluate, but it does mean to make an appraisal by weighing up or assessing the strengths, implications, and limitations. So talk about what's good, what's bad. What does this mean? What is the value or significance of something? Like, you would do your evaluating usually in your IA3 when you're evaluating the evidence and talking about, like, is this good? What are the strengths of this evidence? What are the limitations of this evidence? That sort of thing. So evaluate is more assessed in the IA2s and 3s. So I don't think you'd see it in an exam, but in case you do, the definition is here. I doubt examine would be in there. I can't imagine it would be. Explain. Explain is a massive one. It's very common, especially in Unit 4 of chemistry. I don't know why. I'm thinking of like biofuels and lipids and like all of that sort of stuff right now for explain, but it does mean to make an idea or situation plain or clear by describing it in detail or relevant facts, give an account, and provide additional information. So basically it just means describe it with more. So usually when I am explaining something, because what they've done here is they say, oh, explain something by describing it, which is just another cognitive verb. But I reckon you describe it, and then to make it sort of like explain, you would give examples on top of that. So say you might be describing what predation is between two species, and then you'd talk about what it is, and then you'd say, for example, a bear might catch a fish and like eat it. So you'd give an actual example of what predation is. I don't think any of those are important. And none of those are important. Identify. Okay, identify, I do believe, is in it. Identify is quite a simple one. It just means to distinguish, locate, recognize, and name something. So it might say, identify the 6 quarks, and you just name the 6 of them. I can't remember if that is the cognitive verb they use, but it could be something like that. Or it could be providing an answer from a number of possibilities, which is a great multiple choice question. Identify which of the following is correct, something like that. Maybe is to state a distinguishing factor or feature, but overall identify is pretty easy and you wouldn't have any problems with it. Infer, I feel like there has been like one infer or something, but I might be wrong. But to infer means to derive or conclude something from evidence and reasoning rather than from explicit statements. So you're not just stating the obvious here. You're looking between the lines, you're looking at what it's implying rather than what it is straight up saying. So infer is like, I'm pretty sure it's one of like the pretty high cognitive verbs, like high difficulty, just because you need to think beyond what the text is like explicitly saying. Again, I feel like I've seen an infer, but I can't remember what it was. It might have been in English or something, but it's there if you need it. Interpret might be in there. So interpret means to use your knowledge and understanding to recognize trends and draw conclusions from given information. So what you do is you recognize the trends and find conclusions. You need to make it really clear and explicit. This here is more like for dancing and like performance and all of that sort of stuff, like artwork, which we're not too worried about. It's really the first one that we're worried about, the trends and conclusions, and make it really, really clear. And then just down here, it says it could be in various forms, like words, symbols, pictures, or graphs. So those are the sorts of things that you might get with an interpret question. I don't think there will be investigate. Justify. There might be a justify. I know it's in your assignments, but it might be in your exams as well. To justify something is to give reasons or evidence to support an answer, response, or conclusion. And it's basically just showing or proving how a conclusion is right or reasonable. I don't think any of these are important. Predict. There might be a predict question here. Like, I feel like they're like ones with succession. So ecological succession in biology, I feel like there could be predict questions with that. And predicting is to give an expected result of an upcoming action or event, and you need to do it based on available information. So you can't just say, I reckon this is going to happen. I do believe you have to justify it. I know it doesn't say here, like justify this, but it does say based on available information, which to me says you need to give a reason for why you are predicting something. Let's have a look. Recall. So recall is just to remember something. It's a really, really simple one. It might just be recall the structure of DNA, and then you'd remember, or like recall the structure of a nucleotide, and you'd be like base, phosphate, sugar, bond, like hydrogen bond in between. Really, really simple. Recall, or it might have been like recall the 6 quarks or something. It's literally just write down a list of things that you remember. Recall will usually be the ones where you write like 1-word answers. Like they ask you for the 4 parts of DNA or 4 parts of a nucleotide. I think that's the question I got in my exam last year. You just put down the 4 parts. Recognize, I don't know if that would be in there, but it does say to identify or recall particular features from knowledge. So that is identify, recall. Identify and recall are quite similar. It's just usually that recall is something that just comes out of your head, and identify is something that might come out of like given data or something. None of these look too important. Solve. So solve will be particularly important in physics, and solve means to find an answer to or an explanation for or something like that. And I do recommend that if it is maths that you show your working, and it can actually be algebraic or graphical methods. So in physics, not a lot of people know this, but if you want to and you don't want to do like, say you're doing projectile motion and you have to deal with like the quadratic formula or something and you don't want to, you can actually graph that on your graphing calculator and just write that as your evidence. I personally wouldn't recommend it. I'd always recommend doing it like algebraically, like by hand, and using your calculator to check. But if you are pressed for time, solve does actually mean that you can use graphical methods to do it, and they shouldn't dog on you for that. None of this looks too important. I know understand is in there a couple of times. It just means perceive what is meant by something or be familiar with it. Honestly, how do you assess that? I don't know. I don't think I've ever got a question like on understand. Maybe you might get like a multiple choice on it or something. It's just sort of weird. Like, how do they assess that you perceive what is meant by something? Like, that's weird. It'd probably just be a multiple choice. Yeah, the rest of these, no. So that is it. I think that I would have got majority of the cognitive verbs in there. If I didn't, you would literally just go the glossary, like, I don't know, you'd go up here and say, oh, use. There, I literally forgot to look at use. And then we'd just scroll down and see, okay, let's have a look at the definition for use. It'll be all the way down the bottom. And see, use means to operate or put into effect, apply your knowledge and put it into practice, basically. So what I want you guys to do from now on is know what your cognitive verbs are. And when you're doing practice questions, I want you to use those cognitive verbs and get it right. These verbs actually mean a lot. I never thought they did, but they actually do. This is the last general video that I will be making because I reckon it's time that we start preparing for our mock exams. Look, a lot of you guys message or email me and say, oh, my predicted ATAR was this, or like my year 11 score was this. I really, really want to improve it. Okay, what you're going to do to improve it is to use these cognitive verbs, and I want you guys to start considering your mocks and all of that now. And that doesn't mean necessarily doing practice questions. That means understanding the syllabus and actually understanding the content they want you to do. And that is what I'm going to be starting to make videos on, hopefully for all 3 sciences, and hopefully I get them all out by mock exam time, but I probably won't, to be honest, but I'll try. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was useful, and yeah, I'll get started on explaining the syllabus probably like next week or something. But yeah, thank you for watching, and bye-bye.